What's happening, fam? John here from AF Anime. It's Sunday and we have a new chapter of One Piece, chapter 1041, which is titled Kamurasaki. And in comparison to the last chapter we got 2 weeks ago, this one seems to still have a little bit of action, but is also picking up in the creative writing and the story aspect of One Piece. So with that being said, we should have a good amount to talk about once we reach the discussion part of the video, but for now, let's go ahead and talk about the cover page. And that is the continuation of the German 66 cover storyline, which is titled An Emotionless Excursion. And this cover page isn't horribly different from the last two. It still focuses on Yanji and Niji being captured, but this time we have Pudding brutalizing their faces for the sake of Sanji and his mistreatment. Now, ultimately, this might just serve as brownie points for Pudding, or just for Oda to make her generally a more likable character, especially when it comes to her relation to Sanji. But I still do believe, like I said in a previous chapter review, that she'll probably be the one to set Niji and Yonji free so that way they can rejoin their family. I mean, there isn't a whole lot more I can say about this week's cover page, but I will say that for the past 3 chapters or so, considering that we've just been focusing on Niji and Yonji being captured in those books, it's been incredibly slow going, and hopefully it'll pick up a little bit in terms of pace soon. Now, with that out of the way, we can go ahead and get on with the chapter recap, and chapter 1041 of One Piece picks up right where the last one left off, with the conversation between Momonosuke and Yamato. And to be quite honest with you, the entire first page doesn't have a whole lot of information, but the small amounts that we do get through the dialogue between Momonosuke and Yamato are incredibly loaded with hints and teasers about the past of One Piece, or more specifically, the journey of Odin and the things that he knew and learned with Roger. For example, within this first page, we see that the relationship between Momo and Zunisha isn't just that of being able to conversate with one another. From the dialogue that we get from Zunisha towards Momonosuke, it's implied that Zunisha has some kind of loyalty or some kind of code to which he has to either respond to or help Momonosuke. Now, we don't get that directly confirmed in this chapter, but when it comes to Yamato's dialogue, it's heavily implied that not only did Odin believe his son to be a major part in bringing the dawn of a new age when it comes to the world of One Piece, but he also realized that the character that his son was supposed to be or portray would have that link with Zunisha. Now, that raises a lot of questions and thoughts, but we'll talk about that during the discussion part of the video. For now, we'll get on with page 2, which happens to be as interesting as page 1. We can see that at some point, Odin tore out a page, or an important page, out of his journal that would allude to what him, Roger, and the rest of the Roger pirates saw on Laugh-Tale Island. Now, this would normally raise a lot of questions, but part of me believes it might have something to do with the One Piece, or at the very least, Roger and his desire for people to pursue the One Piece for themselves and not just have it handed to them. So for now, we can assume that missing page of the journal is probably akin to Rayleigh and his lack of wanting to tell Luffy and his crew about what the true history of the world is or what's on Laugh-Tale. So if you have any thoughts on what that page might be, leave it in the comment section down below, as for now we're moving on. At the bottom of that page, we see that Momonosuke is showing a little bit of hesitance or apprehension about the idea of opening the borders if he thinks that it could endanger the people of Wano. And that seems to make sense, and we get a look from Yamato as if she's about to respond in an important way, but unfortunately we move on with the events of the chapter and go straight to the Raizo and Fukurokuju fight, which has finally come to its conclusion with Raizo being the victor. So after he drops his tough guy ninja act, he drops to the floor in exhaustion and Jinbei shows up, presumably to save the day. But we do get an interesting line from Raizo when he says that it was careless of him as the preparations were complete. And I honestly can't think of what that means at the moment, so if you guys know what the heck he's talking about, shoot me a reminder. But for now, we're moving on. We see that Orochi is snapped out of his lovesick stupor and is now painfully aware that his escape plan may not be going as he initially thought. And as everything seems to be crumbling down around him, he finally notices the odd behavior of Kamurasaki, who's been sitting next to him behind that mask this whole time. And at this point, we get an amazingly written line from Orochi when he says, "Are you really Kamurasaki, or are you a ghost? You're supposed to be dead." Now, this of course would allude to 2 personalities that are sitting right in front of him. We have Kamurasaki, who was cut down by Kirishiro a short time ago, who was supposed to be dead, as well as Hiyori, who was also supposed to be dead and is amongst the ghosts of the Kazuki clan and their retainers who were supposed to return as the 9 Red Scabbards. Just an amazingly impressive placement for that line in particular. But moving on, the roof above Orochi collapses and gives way, trapping him under a boatload of rubble. And his situation has become almost instantly dire, as we see that he's taken damage from the fall, but also Kamurasaki has taken advantage of using sea stone nails to prevent him from transforming and freeing himself. Now, I personally didn't get to see where she used these nails of sea stone, but she continues playing music as she taunts Orochi about the naivety of him assuming that she loved him. And the amazing writing continues as she reveals that the song that Orochi likes so much is called Moon Princess, and given that the Kozuki family's crest or symbol is inundated with moon symbology, this makes it incredibly unique and clever for her to be using this song in this situation, especially considering how she, the princess of the Kozuki clan, could be viewed as a moon princess. So with that, she gives Orochi the indirect confirmation of who she is without removing her mask, but also assures that her father is Kozuki Oden. We then move on to the castle basement where another fight seems to be concluded, this time between Izo and the taller of the two CP0 members. And from this cool looking panel we get here, it looks like there was a trade-off, a shot from Izo and a finger pistol from the CP0 member. And with this, they both seem to be down from the count, but from the remaining CP0 member who is still standing, from the dialogue we get from him in the next couple pages, he seems to be increasingly under a state of duress. His physical and mental conditions both seem to be kind of dropping at the moment, but it doesn't necessarily take away from him wanting to fulfill his duties, as we get a ring from the 5 elders who are now telling him to eliminate Luffy as well. And this is another example of the good writing throughout this chapter, as this raises a lot of questions and also answers a couple as well, as we see that they know that this CP0 member would almost certainly meet his death trying to interfere in Kaido and Luffy's fight, but they believe that killing Luffy is so vehemently important to avoiding the worst case scenario, whatever that is, which would lead them to risking this agent's life. But we might not even get to that point, as we can see that the worst generation is still going strong and Drake is not out of the fight quite yet, as he gets up and it appears that he's resolved to doing something important before he dies. So it looks like we do have another important fight incoming for another of the worst generation. But moving on, the next 3 pages are dedicated to generic checkups. We see that Usopp, Kiku, and Kinemon are all fine and on their way to safety, as well as Carrot, Wanda, and Nekomamushi. And we also see that Frankie is in the process of collecting Zoro from what seems to be like a crane type device on his arm. Finally, we see that Nami and Zeus are aware of the victor of the Big Mom Kid and Law fight, and Kid and Law also seem to be checked up in this chapter, and they seem to both be pretty much done for and out for the count, which kind of gives me the impression that the central focus of the next couple chapters is going to be Luffy versus Kaido or Drake versus CP0. So the last 3 pages are dedicated to Luffy and Kaido, but the good writing does not end there, as we do get some kind of confirmation that Kaido in fact does have observation haki, as he can sense that Big Mom has lost her fight. And as Kaido announces the loss to Luffy and pushes him away with his Conqueror's haki, we are treated to a very brief flashback of Big Mom in her prime and the moment she met Kaido at the age of 15. And he kind of gets caught up in his feels as he thinks back to the time where he met Big Mom, or at the time Linlin, and how she took him under her wing as like a younger brother. And as he's crying, we do get the official confirmation that their alliance was more than just temporary. They agreed to pursue the One Piece together. And as these tears are falling, we get an almost uncharacteristically serious moment from Luffy as he powers up into Gear 4th Snake Man and proceeds to assault Kaido with a barrage of attacks. And based off the wordplay and the imagery that we see from these attacks, this would appear to be Luffy's final push or his all-out go, because when he uses Gear 4th Snake Man's Gomu Gomu no Hydra, it appears that the attacks that he's hitting Kaido with are also clad with Conqueror's haki. And this combination should be fairly exhausting, but we do see in the final panel of this chapter that Luffy declares that he's going to drive Kaido out of Wano if it's the last thing he does. So that is going to conclude this chapter, and I know for some of you who have already read it, that's going to be a long recap, but I just really enjoyed the writing and I felt that there needed to be an emphasis on some of the important moments that went down in this chapter. So if I were to give this chapter a rating, I'm going to give it a solid 9.5 out of 10, and that might be an unpopular opinion when it comes to most of the One Piece community and this chapter, but for me at least, as much as I enjoy a good shonen fight, I enjoy an amazing shonen story even more, and the writing for this chapter was just phenomenal for me. So now we can go ahead and move on to some things about this chapter that I do want to discuss. And first we'll talk about Momonosuke and Zunisha. Now in regards to those two, this chapter's content does raise a lot of questions. In particular, what does Oden know about the relationship between his son and Zunisha. Does this mean that his son is in fact a kind of opposite form of Shirahoshi and her ability to speak to the Sea Kings? Honestly, I can't remember which chapter review I stated this in, but I did postulate a while back that Momonosuke might also be one of the great weapons. He could be a kind of opposite to Shirahoshi and her ability to command the largest creatures of the sea, meaning that Momonosuke could in fact be someone who commands the largest of the land-based animals. So in terms of the great war with the world government that's probably brewing after Wano's events, for them to have Shirahoshi and the Sea Kings and then Momonosuke and a bunch of animals similar to the size and strength of Zunisha, this could pose an amazing threat or an amazing battle potential when it comes to picking a side against the world government versus Luffy and his allies. Now, I highly doubt that we'll get any information as to what pages Oden tore out of his journal and his reasoning for doing so, but for now, the expression that was given in this panel by Yamato kind of gives me the impression that she might have some advice or some information based on what she read in the journal, so that way Momonosuke can come to some kind of conclusion of what his father expects from him. Now, if I had to make a personal guess, my assumption is that Oden would want Momonosuke to open up the gates regardless of the potential danger to his people if his people have promised to assist in the abolition or the elimination of the world government and their negative influence on the world of One Piece. So ultimately, it's not a huge update to the current situation, but I think it's a great way for Oda to keep Momonosuke and Yamato relevant to the situation that's ongoing, despite the fact that it seems Momonosuke has saved the Flower Capital from imminent demise. Now, in terms of the whole Raizo situation, we only get one page of that this chapter, so there's not a whole lot to talk about. I am glad that his fight is over and that it was successful, but I am interested to know what preparations he needed to accomplish or what preparations needed to be complete. So that's all on that situation for now. As I said before, if you guys have any ideas on what preparations he might be talking about, let me know in the comment section down below. The next thing to talk about, however, is going to be the Orochi and Kamurasaki situation, or Hiyori. It would appear that Hiyori is asked to get the killing blow on Orochi, and she seems to have set herself up to do so. Orochi is clearly injured from the fall of the debris, and he seems to be pinned down with these nails and can't even transform. So if there's an opportunity for Hiyori to get the final beheading on Orochi, this would be it. Now, my assumption is, since we didn't see the ending of this situation in this chapter, that something more interesting may pop up in the very near future before Orochi gets the sweet release of death or is captured or imprisoned or what have you for his future. But for now, we do know that he seems to be aware that who he is dealing with is in fact Hiyori, and it should serve as a very interesting read when we finally do get back to this situation. Now, when it comes to the CP0 situation, it would appear that things are becoming quite dire for the world government and their agents on Wano. Now, I can't imagine that Izo would be dead without another reunion at least. However, from what we can tell, Drake is going to engage the remaining CP0 member, and in my honest opinion, given the state of duress that guy is under, Drake may be in a position to actually win here. And if he does without passing out or fainting, he might be able to carry Izo off to safety to join the rest of the scabbards and waiting for Luffy to finish his fight. And I'm also very interested to see what this worst possible scenario that they're talking about is. Now, my honest opinion, I can't get any reason as to understanding why they would need Kaido to win or survive. I mean, the easiest thought there is that if they just need Kaido to stay in power so that way they can have access to Wano, its sea stone, and their weapons. Now, my train of thought here is that if the world government were to have Wano out from under an oppressive thumb and actually doing its own thing, opening their gates, this could mean that Wano would be in direct opposition of the world government and also giving their weapons, their samurai, their resources to opposing forces to the world government. So I suppose we'll see how that turns out, but the next point of discussion would be the very brief flashback that we get with Kaido and Linlin. Now, outside of seeing Big Mom in her most aesthetically pleasing form, we get to see a side of Big Mom that is actually rather endearing, meaning that her character personality in this chapter was actually rather likable. Now, as I stated in my recent Big Mom video, I think that Big Mom isn't so much a bad character as much as she is just an ignorantly misguided character. So I think Oda showing this flashback might be a way of showing us a character change or a possible goal change when it comes to Big Mom and her role throughout Wano. One thing that is interesting to note from this flashback is that we see from Big Mom or Linlin that she doesn't trust Rocks and she refers to him as a scoundrel, and that she basically takes Kaido, a 15-year-old Kaido, under her wing. So it's a lot to think about there. One thing that is interesting is knowing that Kaido did join the Rocks Pirates at the age of 15, which seems a bit younger than I think most of us would have assumed. Now, for me, I think this would be a key indicator that we might be going into Kaido's flashback, or at least what led him to joining the Rocks Pirates and putting him on the current path that he's on. And hopefully we'll get to see that within the next couple chapters, as it looks like Luffy is about to go all out, or maybe give us his final push when it comes to this fight with Kaido. Now, when it comes to my thoughts on this chapter, it was an amazing chapter, and it doesn't quite feel like things are gearing up toward the climax quite immediately, but it does seem that the importance of Wano really shines through when it comes to what's going to go down after all this is said and done, since we get to see the immense amount of stress that the world government is enduring while monitoring the situation from afar. Just amazing stuff from Oda this week. Now, from what I can tell, we don't have a break next week, but then again, we've been very break heavy throughout this first quarter of the year. So from the way things have been going, we can assume there may be a break next week, but I have high hopes that maybe the fire will continue this upcoming Sunday. So this recap and review has already gone long enough, and I'm getting pretty tired. It's damn near 1 o'clock here in Ohio. Thank you guys very much for tuning in if you made this far. If you guys want to talk about this week's chapter or just anything One Piece in general, hit it up in the comment section down below. I'm always listening. And if you enjoyed this video and are looking forward to more One Piece content, please like, share, and subscribe. I will be back with more One Piece related content very soon. Thank you guys very much for tuning in again. I'm John from AF Anime, and I'll see you guys in the next video.